Welcome to Long Story Short, a series where big historical events and themes are explained in a concise way that does not sacrifice facts or analysis. In today's episode, we're going to be dissecting the early years of the Weimar Republic. Despite the foundations laid by the 1919 Constitution, there was many attempts by both far left and far-right groups to overturn the newly established democracy, which made early Weimar politics unstable. One of these attempts at a putsch began right at the birth of the Republic. The Spartacist Uprising was born out of a feeling that Germany's revolution against the Kaiser did not go far enough. So the Spartacist Uprising began in the January of 1919, sparked by the dismissal of the Berlin chief of police, Emil Eichhorn, over his association with German leftist politics, which led to demonstrations of workers and leftists on Berlin's streets. But matters escalated, and a committee of leading communists announced that they intended to overthrow the Social Democrats to establish their own government. This inspired the protests in Berlin to intensify, and groups of armed workers and communists began to occupy buildings such as newspaper headquarters, offices, and public buildings in the city. Historians estimate that as many as 50,000 people participated in the Spartacist Uprising, alongside prominent communist figures like Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. As a precaution, the Weimar government left the city, but they did not let the uprising go on without a response. The SPD government brought in the Freikorps, a right-wing paramilitary group made up of former members of the army who swore to uphold the Weimar Republic. The Freikorps entered Berlin and suppressed the communists. Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg were captured and then murdered. This allowed the Weimar government to return to some sense of normality. Ultimately, the Spartacist uprising failed because of its lack of organization and focus, but it was not the last of the putsches that Weimar Germany faced. Alongside other left-wing uprisings, such as the events in Bavaria in 1919, there also were various right-wing putsches too, one of the most infamous being the Kapp Putcsh. The Kapp Putcsh was born out of the context which I discussed in my last video, the Treaty of Versailles and the stab in the back myth, but the short-term trigger for the Kapp Putcsh was decisions made by Weimar financial minister Matthias Erzberger, which were unpopular with conservatives. Erzberger attempted to deal with the debt and reparations which Germany was faced with post-war. He did this by introducing higher taxation for the rich, as well as trying to cut down the army budget. This resulted in an attempt at overthrowing the SPD by the far right in March 1920. The putsch was headed by Wolfgang Kapp, an infamous right-wing figure, alongside high-ranking members of the Freikorps, Captain Erhard and Pabst. The putsch also had the backing of General von Ludwitz, a German army officer. An armed group of Freikorps, led by Captain Erhard, marched into Berlin on March the 13th, which forced Ebert's government to evacuate to the city of Dresden. With the government gone, Kapp pronounced himself as Chancellor of Germany. Ebert's government turned to the German army to respond to Kapp's armed putsch. However, the army and its commanders refused to fight men who had previously been part of the army. This did not mean that Kapp got popular support. Bureaucrats refused to cooperate with him, and the workers of Berlin went on strike as called by the SPD government. This made the Kapp Putsch crumble relatively quickly, after 4 days in fact, with the leaders fleeing to Sweden and the Freikorps surrendering control of the city once again to the legitimate government. Whilst Kapp's violent attempt at commandeering control of Germany may have failed, the effects that it would have on Germany would prove more lingering. The forces of right-wing extremism and fascism in Germany started to mobilize and to display increasing levels of violence. Between 1919 and 1923, there were 354 political assassinations at the hands of right-wing terrorists. This is the environment which gave way to the next significant attempt at overthrowing the government, the Putsch or the Munich Putsch, which took place in November 1923. The National Socialist or Nazi Party and other far-right extremists, including Adolf Hitler and General Ludendorff, planned to take advantage of the chaos and discontent which had erupted during the hyperinflation that Germany experienced that same year. The Nazis intended to overthrow the government through a march on Berlin in the same way that Mussolini had marched on Rome, but they first conspired to gain control through force in the state of Bavaria. An opportunity for this arose on November the 8th, when politicians were present at a gathering at a beer hall in Munich. These men were Gustav von Kahr, Minister of Bavaria, General Otto von Lissau, a leader of the army, and Hans Ritter von Caesar, who was head of the Bavarian police. Hitler surrounded the beer hall with a group of Nazis and entered the building armed with a gun and declared his plans to overthrow the SPD government. Brandishing his gun, he then led Lissau, Kahr and Caesar into an adjoining room in order to force them to give their support for his coup, which they gave whilst held at gunpoint. Believing he had fully gained their support, Hitler left the beer hall and left the three men under the watch of Ludendorff, who let them go, believing that they were fully cooperative. Lissau, Kahr and Caesar, when they were free, redacted their support for the Nazi putsch and then called upon the police and army to deal with it. Hitler and Ludendorff still continued on with their putsch despite this. 2,000 Nazis and other right-wing extremists marched on Munich streets, but they were met by the police. This resulted in clashes on the streets, in which 4 police officers were murdered by the Nazis. The police did manage to overpower them and arrest the putsch conspirators, including Hitler. They then were tried in court. However, they had a judge whose own right-wing beliefs made him give the putsch leaders a lighter sentence, even letting General Ludendorff off completely. Hitler only served 9 months of his 5-year sentence before he was released from jail. Whilst in the short term, the Munich Putsch did little to topple the Weimar Republic, in the long term the putsch would prove detrimental, as it bolstered Hitler's reputation amongst far-right extremists and made him seek a darker and more sinister route to power, where he would destroy democracy from within. Hi there, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. I also have an Instagram and a TikTok page which I have linked below. Again, thank you so much for watching. I have been Our Historia, and until next time.